Here we go. Today we're going to be talking about scope. Just to check, you can hear me, see my screen okay? Cool. And the big idea of scope is that the big idea is like, what do you have access to and where do you have access to it, right? And the thing is that usually we don't think about scope too much until it causes us problems. And the big question I put here on the screen is like, have you ever written code one place but had trouble accessing it? And what are some things you've done to kind of like fix that in the past? Anyone?
Cry then pry.
Fair. I think that like a lot of times that like when people have problems with uh, with scope, I think they go to is like they make it an instance variable, which is not great. I think it's like it does fix it temporarily, but what we want to do is like really kind of dive into like what scope is and understanding what's happening there. So what we're going to do is that we're going to learn scope together
I'm
through.
so sorry to interrupt. Is there any chance you could increase the size on your blue notes?
Better?
Thank you.
Yep. Where was I? So we're going to play with some of this, and I'm going to put you into groups. You're going to experiment, and we'll kind of get a feel about how scope works based on some trial and error. Let's create the breakout rooms. Cool. And I'm going to post this in your Slack channel. The first thing will break out for about 5 minutes. And we'll come back and talk about it. Again. And so some of these situations that we made you do in these past 5 minutes aren't things that you would actually do, but they're instructive in the fact that we're trying to like push at the boundaries of what we can and can't do. So let's do this. The idea here is that every single time that we create a class or method or we use a block, we create a new scope. Anything that is not inside one of those is in a default scope known as the global scope, which is, some people call that to the top level scope. And every program has one and only one global scope. We may have method scopes or the block scopes depending on what exactly we're doing, how many methods we create. And the thing is that when we're not going to be using the global scope too much because we usually constrain our classes and methods. And so we have this global scope. I like to think of scopes as like these spaces where rules can happen. Like, for example, you can do certain things in your home that you can't do outside. And there's some things that just happen kind of like everywhere that rules take place. Anyone have any questions about that little portion they just did? Anything that kind of stood out to them? Sean, thoughts about that little snippet we just went through?
Well, not really. We didn't get too far, to be honest with you. We only got to like the third one.
Okay, that's fine. Cool. So what we're going to do is that I want to make another one. And we're going to get a little deeper into this one. And I want to send you to groups and we'll take another 5. Self. And people are back, and we kind of moved on. Like the first kind of set of things we had you kind of poke at dealt with global scope, and now we are you've created like a method scope for yourself. So like again, to reiterate, when we create a method, we're creating a method scope. So if we do something like this, and I run this, oops, we get that error message, undefined local variable or method X in main object, name error. And we see that's on line 3, we look line 3, and it puts us here. And we see here that because we are in this method print variable and we're trying to access X, it's gonna fail out because it doesn't know what X is. We've created X up here. Up here, X is in the global scope. In here, it's trying to look for X in the method scope, and that's why I can't see it. If we wanted this to work, we would have to do one of two things. We'd have to go in here and do the X equals 10 or whatever in here. That's one way we could do it. Or we can make it so that we are passing X through as an argument. Do that. Cool. And so we can also do a kind of variation of this where we just have this print variable method. And we can set X equals to 10 equal here. And then we do a print variable. And when we run this, we see here that it does print out that 10. However, if we do this, we can see that the inverse also kind of works the way we expect it to. It's going to freak out, even though we are defining X in here, when we're trying to access by printing out X to the screen. We are only seeing, we can't see what's inside this method scope. Questions about method scope now that we're one level deep?
So, Mike, this from the def to end is called the method and not a block, correct?
A method is, the things that block can mean many different things depending on the context. There is like, in general, a block refers to just a bunch of code. So like, yes, you could use the term block in this circumstance, but it is more accurate and more precise to call it the method.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Other questions about this method scope so far here? Cool. Let us get yet another level deeper. And let's mix up some groups, and we'll do this again. I'll post this in your Slack channel. It'll take 5 minutes. I'm going to hit enter this time first before breaking you out. Cool, and we're back. Through that little bit of exercise that we just did there, we can see here that we can get our information inside the method scope by using an argument. And when we do something like this, if I can spell, a local argument implicitly creates a local variable. So like when you define a method argument, you're essentially creating a local variable. And what's pretty much happening here is that this is no real difference between doing like an X equals 4. This lets us kind of like tunnel in and pass through values into different scopes. Arguments are going to be the preferred way in which we get information from one scope to another. Anyone have any questions about this so far? We've done just the global scope, method scope, and how do we get information from one scope to another. I will sip. No, I'm all out. You have until I finish pouring my drink. in case you have a question.
I have a quick question.
Yep.
Sometimes in a class, we'll have the option to use either the instance variable or the adder reader. Both access the same things. Is there a preference to one or the other, maybe more efficient, faster, better?
Instance variables are used to maintain state. Like anything that is not related to the state of an object should not be stored in instance variable. Instance variables are computationally expensive, and we don't want to use instance variables to hold information that does not pertain to that instance of the object. Otherwise, we want to prefer passing information as arguments. Your dog is vomiting bile. So this is a good. Other questions? Cool. Let us do this next one, and then we'll take a Pomodoro break afterwards. So what we've done here is that we kind of, in this past like kind of section, we've kind of explored block scope, and block scope means means that we're referring to the code between the do and the end, and say like an enumeral. That's what you know so far, right? And this one works a little different. Blocks are kind of special. What they do is that blocks let you access variables that are outside. That's why we can do this pattern of like iterating over something and then accessing this total local variable that I've declared out of it. But the block variable that we've kind of used in here, like this number, is only available inside the block. And this is kind of a special thing called a closure. Like if we were to do a puts number out here, this would fail out because it would we are working in the global scope and not the block scope, and we didn't know what that was. Questions about block scope?
And if you put greeting, it's also going to return nothing as well, right? Because we haven't really defined it anywhere else.
Let's do that. Let's show you. What do you think? Do you think it will or will work, Danny?
I think it will not.
Yep, it will not. Right, whatever you do in there lives in there. But again, the block scope is different. That it can, the closure works differently in that it can work outside. The one way I've had it described to me is that a closure is kind of like an envelope. It kind of folds whatever's outside into itself.
So like we have numbers, the numbers variable set to that array of numbers. Like if we were to like set greeting kind of as a variable up there, would we also have to include it in the envelope, the block there? So it would have to be like
no. Like let's say if we do greeting up here, oops. Stop. Yep. No. If we did greeting here, we do a puts greeting here, and it'll work. Right, because it has access to things outside the scope. Cool, Philip.
So in the error message, it says undefined local variable. Are we supposed to consider that to be the same thing as global variable?
No, a global variable is accessible everywhere. What it means by undefined local variable is that it cannot find a local variable in that scope. In the global scope, I cannot find the local variable called greeting. Cool. All right. Let us take a 5-minute Pomodoro break. Let's see you back at 10:54.
Thank you, 10:54.
You can call it outside the class.
Because you were saying like, hey, for this person, I want to call that method in there. You're calling that method on the object that it belongs to. Cool. All right.
But only because person was global as well, right?
Yeah. Cool. So the next part of this is instance variables. And instance variables, when we set them, are available throughout the entire class scope. It excludes any method in the class. Like anything set to an instance variable can just be referred to in any method inside that class. And so the reason for that is that like instance variables are accessible. They have access throughout the entire class, and this will work. Cool. Hello, my name is Bob Ross. However, I want to contrast that if we did something like this. Let me just copy and paste this here. Oops. And when we run this, the first thing that's going to happen is, hello, my name is Bob Ross. I am a, looks like something's missing there, and we get a nil. The reason why here is that when we set @job to painter, cool, and we're instantiating a new person, Bob Ross, and we do the greeting, it's going to go here, hello, my name is @name. Well, @name is defined inside this class, so it knows that this is going to be Bob Ross, and it says I am a job. And the reason why we have nothing appearing here is that this has no access to @job. @job is set outside of its scope, outside the class scope in the global scope. And the same thing we down here, we get this nil here, is that when we try to print out the name, we don't have access to @name. @name is defined and it lives only inside this instance of the class. Questions about this so far? This is definitely something that is tricky. I think that like one of the most important skills to get as a programmer is to like instinctually realize like where you currently are inside scope. That can be challenging. Like having like in the back of your head, like, okay, where am I? What do I have access to? And keeping that in your head. It's something that's just going to get, you're going to get better. It just takes time and practice. Honestly, it's going to take a lot of you messing up. I think that is like the best way I learn is that when I make mistakes, like why doesn't this work? And then over time, I start to pick up patterns as to why something doesn't work and what steps I take to kind of fix that. And that is what makes me really kind of understand how this works, how I should be using scope, the proper way of using scope, understanding what the limitations of what data I have where. So now I just want to kind of open it up to questions in general about scope so far.
Hey, Mike.
Yep.
On this example.
Which example?
The one you have up on your screen.
Okay.
Like,
yep.
All you have to do is initialize the job instance variable to complete that sentence.
If I just put this up here, it'll work.
Okay.
I mean, the first part will work. This still won't work here. I mean, sorry. This still won't work. But to get this working, I would have to make sure that I would have to instantiate job inside the class. Cool. So we're rolling a bit a little late. There is an associated activity for this class in the CFU. I'll post those into your channel after class. And I highly suggest that this afternoon/evening that you do complete the activity on your own. And I'll post that there. And let's roll into talking about flow control. And I'm going to